The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Bob Good.
Thank you, Chairman Biggs, my good friend from Arizona, for your leadership on this all-important issue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank you also to my friend from Montana and his remarks just a moment ago. The founders gave in the Constitution the authority for spending to the House of Representatives. It's the House of Representatives that most directly reflects where the American people are, what the American people's wishes are on a federal level. It's not the White House, it's not the Senate, certainly not the Supreme Court. It is the people's house, the House of Representatives, which proportionally represents everyone across the country, equally with some 800,000 citizens per representative. It's the House of Representatives that has the responsibility. We have the responsibility to ensure our ability to pay our nation's debts and to protect the credit or the borrowing capacity for when it's necessary of the United States federal government. We talk often about what are the threats, the greatest threats to the country. There are numerous existential threats to our country right now, I would submit like never before in the history of the United States, brought on by the policies of this administration, Mr. Speaker, and those who had the majority of both houses for the previous 2 years. Whether it's the open border, where some 6 to 7 million illegals have swarmed into our country, facilitated and helped by this administration's policies. Whether it's our broken education system, our indoctrination on our college campuses, our K-12, whether it's the weakening of our military, our failures on the national stage, whether it's the threat of China, or whether it's our national debt and our spending. And as we address tonight and discuss the national debt and the spending and the debt ceiling issue, the spending piece of this, the responsibility of the House, is not just addressing that issue, but how we manage the United States spending. The federal spending addresses all of the other issues. To utilize the power of the purse, to stop funding the harmful policies, not just the wasteful, reckless spending, but the literal harmful spending that's making our country less safe, less secure, less prosperous, and less free. And as we talk specifically about the national debt, it's been said already tonight, over $31 trillion. I happen to serve on the Budget Committee. A couple of weeks ago, we brought before our committee once again OMB Director Young, Shalonda Young, the Biden administration's budget director. Funny term to apply budget director to anybody in this administration, Mr. Speaker. But as we were having a chance to question the budget director for the Biden administration, I asked Ms. Young, what is the national debt? And she could not tell me. She said it was somewhere around maybe 24 trillion, and I corrected her that it was over 31 trillion. I asked her, how much does that equate to per American citizen? She did not know. I helped her with the fact that it's nearly 100,000 for 330 million American citizens. 100,000 per citizen. That means about 300,000 per taxpayer or per family. I then asked her, what is the percentage of GDP? Debt to GDP. She did not know, Mr. Speaker. She thought it might be 90-something%, and I helped her with the information that it is about 125% debt to GDP ratio. I asked her when it was the last time it was that high in the history of our country. She did not know, and I helped her to realize it was World War II. To follow up on what you were saying a moment ago, my friend from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, we also had before another committee that I serve on, our Federal Reserve Chairman, Powell, another caucus I'm a part of, the Republican Study Committee. And he spoke to us about interest rates and about trying to bring down inflation, shared his remarks, and once again did not deal with the issue of the national debt. Didn't even bring it up. Didn't even bring up the federal spending. And I said to him, what is the number one cause of the inflation? And historically, when we raise interest rates, we're trying to what? Cool a hot economy to ward off a recession. Instead, we have caused the inflation with the spending, And now we're making it worse on the American people by raising the interest rates in a futile attempt to reduce inflation in a weak economy and making things worse for the American people. Mr. Biggs, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the remarks a few moments ago from my colleague from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, I led a letter to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen asking her about what Mr. Biggs was speaking about a moment ago. What is her plan to ensure we do not have a default when we reach the debt ceiling limit? How will she prioritize spending to ensure we don't reach that, we don't result in a default when we reach that debt limit? We have not gotten satisfactory answers to that. And Mr. Biggs is exactly right, Mr. Speaker. When we exhaust these so-called extraordinary measures, which part of my letter also asked, when will we exhaust those? How is that determined? Have not gotten satisfactory answers to that either. But the fact is, when we reach the debt limit and we can no longer utilize gimmicks and clever tactics to try to extend that, we will simply have to prioritize our spending. We've got a record $5 trillion coming to the Treasury, never happened before in the history of the country. Frankly, because of the Trump Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which has done what always happens in history: when you cut taxes, you get more income, more revenue. Don't let the Democrats and the majority or the administration lie to us, Mr. Speaker, and tell us we have a deficit because of the tax cuts. That's simply not true, with $5 trillion in revenue coming into the Treasury the first time in history. However, because, as Mr. Biggs said, we're spending over $6 trillion, if we reach the debt limit and we can no longer delay through these extraordinary measures, we will simply have to prioritize spending. It will force, that's why they don't want to do it. That's why they don't want to reach it. That's why they want your $3 or $4 trillion, Mr. Rosendale, Mr. Biggs stated just a few moments ago, because they don't want to have to prioritize spending. There's more than enough revenue coming in to fund Social Security and Medicare. There's more than enough revenue to pay the debt, the interest on the debt. We would simply be forced to cut discretionary spending. But we have a plan that we in the House Freedom Caucus have put forward to cut somewhere in the range of $1.5 trillion immediately out of the gate. And then and Mr. Biggs led the way on this with 500 bills, with 500 specific targeted cuts towards those 1,200 unauthorized, but still appropriated in previous Congress programs that would save us another $500 billion, so that we would never have to raise the debt ceiling again if we have the immediate $1.5 trillion in cuts now, and we use the appropriations process this fall to cut even further. And again, I yield back to Mr. Biggs, and I thank him for his leadership on this issue.